now joining us, and we appreciate his patience as we're about 4 minutes tardy. So glad to have this guy on the Mixed Martial Arts beat. I'm not sure what he would be doing if he wasn't ours, but Mixed Martial Arts reporter and content editor for TSN Sports, Aaron Bronsteter, is with us on social media at Aaron Bronsteter. Great to see you, sir. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me on for the Bronsteter Minute. Appreciate it. Looking forward to next week.
Say that again. You cut out a little bit.
Oh, is my mic cutting out?
Yeah, the mic's cutting out, so we'll wait. We'll make sure we get.
How's this? How's the?
Yeah, there we go. There we go. AB.
All right, I'll get rid of my high tech equipment. We'll go off. We'll go off the phone mic.
There we go.
It's great to see you, brother. So, so you said Monday was a good day for you. I'm always curious after you get off a live event like that. Do you get a chance to decompress? As you can see, I kind of got to hit the ground running. Tuesday, I'll take a deep breath, but obviously we're right into another fight night this weekend, as I'd imagine you are too.
Yeah, I usually take Mondays off when I come home from travel, but you guys asked me to be on the show, and that's important to me, of course. So here I am, and I'm happy to join you guys. I'm back at home, 3 kids, so the grind never ends. You get off that plane, and you're right back to your other job.
How old are your kids? 3 kids. Good for you.
I got last week, my oldest turned 11, my youngest turned 3, and I've got a 5-year-old in the middle.
All right, youngest is 3, so he's got 15 years until they're all out of your hair.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Just counting down the days. I got a timer up in my kitchen. It's like a digital.
Right.
Yeah. How many more hours I have left?
So I said to my twin brother, I know you've been on Remember the Show with Bilal Muhammad, and I know they're going to get you back on, but I was like, hey, should we book Aaron Bronsteter on the Anik and Florian pod? He's like, yeah, why would you not book him? It's like he's fucking better.
I agree with them. I agree with them. That's a great point by them.
So
why would you?
Right. Well, so and we went right to it. So so how much traveling have you been doing? Where do you live, and how have you navigated sort of the pandemic as a reporter that I know would like to be live and at events as much as possible?
Well, I'm in Toronto. This was actually my first trip back since the pandemic. So it's been about 20 months since I've traveled for a UFC event. And, I don't get nervous doing interviews on site and talking to the fighters, but the first day that I was coming back, I was in my hotel room saying, am I going to be any good at this anymore? I haven't done it in a while. And then Michael Chandler stepped in front of me. I'd never met the guy, but I've spoken to him many times in the past. It was just like riding a bike. I just got right back into my stride. And it's just so great to be back in person with all these athletes, because the Zoom interviews for 20 months, it just got so redundant. Like, you could have told me I was talking to like the Pope tomorrow on Zoom. It would have been like any other interview. It's just like, okay, well, what time? It's Tuesday at 5:45. Okay, yeah, no problem. Yeah. I wasn't getting out of bed excited to do interviews on Zoom anymore, but being on location again it was such a breath of fresh air. So I was happy to be back on the ground.
Part of the reason I asked that question was because I hadn't seen you with boots on the ground in a while, and I know the Canadian landscape has been a little bit challenging to navigate. Well, that's good. Picked up right where you left off. So I saw a tweet that you had about this Justin Gaethje, Michael Chandler business, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, but almost as if to say, like, this might have been Gaethje's 3rd or 4th best fight in his career. And I've capped his fights on the air by saying, have you ever seen anything like Justin Gaethje? I have not. And Chandler is like right there with him. What did you make of that fight? And I don't know if it's time to give it historical context, but a lot of people are trying to do that too.
Well, yeah, I was saying it's one of the front runners for fight of the year, and it's probably Justin Gaethje's 3rd or 4th best fight, like you mentioned. I don't think that fight was as good as the Poirier fight. I don't think it was as good as the Alvarez fight, and I think the Michael Johnson fight, just for as long as it lasted, was more exciting. Crazy. But man, that was still an incredible fight. Nuts. Like, I was there, and I was on the edge of my seat, and it was awesome. And I was one of the very few people that said I thought that fight was going to go to a decision, just because these are 2 elite fighters in a 3-round fight, and it almost ended a couple times in the first, but it did end up going the distance, which I think a lot of people were surprised by. But yeah, I just think Justin Gaethje, to me, is the pound for pound most exciting fighter to ever do it. Like, you just know that when he's entering the octagon, you're going to get something special. He has not had a single boring fight for his entire UFC career, but also his entire MMA career. His fights in the World Series of Fighting were unbelievable as well.
Yeah, like, who would be the most offended guy if you said Gaethje is the most exciting fighter in MMA history? If you're a fighter out there and you're offended, you can hit us up at Anik Florian pod. Like, who's the number 2, Aaron? You know what I mean? Like, because I think a lot of us give Gaethje that perch. I don't know. Interesting conversation.
I think it's Fedor. Like, I was thinking, the other person that came to mind for me was Fedor, in terms of just guys that when they're in there, it's going to be an exciting fight. Because Fedor, his fights always end in like weird ways, and
that's
in crazy ways, and they're always very frenetic. So I would put him at number 2, just in terms of sheer entertainment value. I'd put him probably at number 2. I'm sure there are others that I'm missing. I mean, I felt terrible for Shane Burgos, because Shane Burgos is like probably a top 10 exciting fighter also.
Yeah.
And he had to fight right after those guys.
Right.
And that fight, I said, would 95% of the time, that's the fight of the night.
Oh, we're just going to skip. We're just going to skip over Tank Abbott, huh, guys? That's what we're going to do. We're just going to forget about Tank Abbott and all his. Okay.
Right. Right.
Semi-serious.
I mean, that is a good point. Tank Abbott was going in there and flatlining guys with one big shot. But that was a long time ago.
Completely different era. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, totally different era.
Yeah.
Well, right, because the emotions that I had in 1993 at 15 years old watching Royce Gracie is like nothing I've ever seen in my life.
Right.
So, all right. So I wanted to get Kemflo's thoughts on this as well. TSN's Aaron Bronsteter with us here on the Anik and Florian podcast. So the comparisons between George St. Pierre and Kamaru Usman, people just can't help themselves. And I sometimes talk in absolutes and want to have conversations about legacies that are incomplete. And Kamaru's is certainly that, right? So you can compare Kamaru to Khabib, right? Khabib's is done at 13-0 in the UFC, and Kamaru's already 15-0. But you've outlined a lot of statistics, obviously, on social media between these two guys. And Kenny is a former teammate of George St. Pierre, so we'll get his thoughts on the other side. But how do you compare these guys in terms of, their primes and when they're at their peak? Like, who's the better guy?
Yeah, I put those stats out, and I got the people that thought it was Usman saying, "Oh, these are biased stats," and then the people that thought it was George saying, "Oh, these are biased stats."
Right,
and I'm saying, I'm just putting out data. I added zero context to it whatsoever. It was like a side-by-side thing. And man, it makes it really difficult to come up with an answer because, George was so dominant, and he didn't really have a Colby Covington in his career. I mean, the closest thing was probably Matt Serra, where like you need to see a rematch to really determine who won that fight. George was just, and I mean, Kenny, you were fighting during George's era and you trained with George. Like, how special of an athlete George St. Pierre is. And I mean, you look at some of the scorecards, like 50-43 against John Fitch. If you were watching back then, John Fitch was a destroyer who wouldn't give people a second to breathe, would smother them for 3 rounds, and would make them look like a child fighting a man. And George did that to John Fitch. The problem is we live in a world of recency bias, where you look at what Kamaru Usman's doing and you see how dominant he is, and you see him beating Colby Covington. People make this point, like Colby Covington would have beaten all the guys that George St. Pierre fought. Fair, but we're talking about 2 different eras where guys were specialists versus, a lot more well-rounded mixed martial artists in today's world. So it's really hard to make that comparison. It's funny, when Kamaru won the Ultimate Fighter, Faraz Zahabi was at TSN. I think it was like that the day after or the next week with Rory McDonald. And I said to Faraz, this guy just won the Ultimate Fighter, and he reminds me of George. Like, I have a feeling about this guy. And that might be the best prediction I've ever made in the history of making predictions, because it's rung true. It's rang true with just how dominant Kamaru's been. And I don't really have a good answer for who the better welterweight of all time is. And I think that just speaks volumes about Kamaru being a top 5 all-time guy, because a lot of people put George as a top 3 all-time guy.
Kenny, I want to hear your thoughts on this. The John Fitch name, I think, is an important one to inject into this conversation, because, I mean, that dude kept me up at night, like just in terms of, man, like, what would I do if I ever got locked in a space with someone like that, So I don't know. I don't know that there's a great answer. I mean, certainly title defenses are the number one consideration for me, and George has more of those right now. They never fought each other, so we're never going to get a clear answer. But what do you think about these 2 legacies and these 2 guys and all the comparisons that are out there?
Yeah, listen, I think the other interesting thing to kind of talk about was that, both these guys had very different trajectories and very different paths to their championship reigns. I think Kamaru, when you look at his first 10 fights, right, didn't have the strongest strength of schedule, okay? You look at George St. Pierre's first 10 fights, it's like Carl Parisian's in there, Matt Hughes is in there. And then we talk about who George beat to become a champion. Matt Hughes, who was at the time the most dominant UFC champion that they've ever had. So and he went out there and dominated him, then beat him again. Which is really impressive. Then, of course, you talk about all his title defenses. I don't think Usman is there yet, okay? And clearly it's a different era. The strength of schedule now that he's faced over the last 10 fights or the last 7 fights or whatever is a higher level in a lot of ways, right? That there's the fighters are so much more well-schooled. They're way more experienced. So that is very different. Usman is on his way. I'm not ready to say he's the best welterweight champion yet. But again, George St. Pierre is in front of him, the guy who I think is the greatest of all time. Never had any controversial, drug tests or things that, so there's nothing that is really smearing his name there. Had a and any losses that he had that maybe were big upsets, like the one against Matt Serra, he was able to go and get revenge. And so I don't know. And as far as name power, George St. Pierre, one of the biggest champions that we've had, one of the biggest names we've ever had. And he did it in an era where, do you maybe in the Bisping fight, but was there ever a time you ever heard George St. Pierre say anything bad about his opponent or ever talk crap? He did it the old-fashioned way, and he did it little by little over time. It became, the biggest name in the sport. I guess Brock Lesnar might have been a bigger name, but right there with him. So, but Usman's absolutely on his way. He's been so impressive. Different trajectories, two amazing fighters.
AB, you think Kemfo's got love for George St. Pierre at all? Geez, man.
Okay, I'm fine.
Who doesn't have love for George St. Pierre?
Of course.
The guy, like you mentioned, was such a gentleman. And you look at the guys that he beat, I think every single one of his UFC fight would have been against a top 5 guy. Listen, the division was a lot smaller back then. This was a growing sport at the time. But you mentioned Karo Parisian, and that was his UFC debut. Parisian was like a title contender at that point in time. Like, people thought that he was one of the guys that was going to be a longtime champion in the sport. And George, I looked at the stats today, and I think it was like 26 significant strikes to 1 in that fight or something along those lines. Like, George just completely embarrassed Karo Parisian, who, again, like, if you go back then, I think a lot of people, like, Karo was a young monster who a lot of people thought was going to be the champion, right? So, again, a lot of it is about context. A lot of it is you're trying to argue with people that haven't watched the sport for as long, that didn't watch George's rise and his championship years with the same lens as what they see with Usman right now. And hey, on the flip side of that, I think Usman is fighting the far more well-rounded guys. He's got a lot more guys in the division because there are a lot more people fighting now. Like, the UFC is so much bigger. So the talent pool is still huge for him to face. And he's fighting like guys like Gilbert Burns and of course, Covington twice, Masvidal. Like, these guys are just absolute marauders, right? So it's not like he's having any cupcakes in his, in his resume. So it's what makes it such a difficult question, because we've seen George lose twice, and we've just never seen, unless you watched Usman's second professional fight, we haven't seen Usman lose. So it's hard for us to look at it through the same lens.
And we've seen George nearly lose and come back and win, get kicked in the head by Carlos Condit. And had that been an L, obviously that would have changed his legacy. Like,
and he won that round.
Right.
Won that round.
Not the fight, right. And Kamaru really hasn't had that moment. There wasn't a singular time in this fight over the weekend that it felt like he got hurt or wobbled, really, even though Colby landed some big shots. And the UFC 245 fight, the ability for Kamaru to take those shots was just insane. Like, man, he's incredible. And so is George, obviously. And it's an interesting conversation. So what's like your favorite sport other than mixed martial arts? Like, do you watch a lot of sports on TV? Like me, I got 3 kids. I never watch TV, sports or otherwise, really, if it's not the UFC. Like, what do you watch? You a hockey guy?
No, I was never really a hockey guy. When I first started getting into journalism, I wanted to cover basketball. I was so into basketball. But now there are so many games that I can't keep up with it at all. Like, if you ask me to name 10 players on like a specific team, I probably wouldn't be able to do it now. But back then, I used to be able to rail off their stats. I used to be able to tell you, what number they were drafted, which college they went to. Like, I was really into basketball when I first got into journalism. I'd say now my second favorite sport is the NFL. Like, it's a lot more palatable to just watch a bunch of games on a Sunday on Red Zone and follow along. And I'm in many fantasy football leagues, so that would probably be the only other sport that I follow fairly closely. Yeah. But like you mentioned, it's just because the mixed martial arts schedule is year round and we put so much time into this. I understand if people don't have kids or whatever, they can probably, watch a lot of sports whenever they want to in their leisure time. But with 3 kids, it's, no rest for the wicked.
I just love it. Like, if you're a red-blooded man or woman, how do you not like American football? Like, you're too smart an individual to not like American football.
It's amazing. The NFL is such a fun sport. And then when you watch, when you are watching it through, when you're thinking about your fantasy team, like yesterday was such a disaster for me, and a disaster for so many like if you were in suicide leagues, yesterday was not a good day for you in all likelihood.
was a bad one. I got a fantasy team that's 0-8, you know. But I used to have a lot of UFC fans, like European fans, ask me, like, hey, I want to get into the NFL. Give me a team to root for. And I never gave them the New England Patriots because I felt like it was too much of a front runner, you know, like it was like Man City. Like when I started following Man City.
I don't really have a team either in the NFL. Like I just love the sport. Like I love I always like kind of cling on to certain players. Like I was a Chargers fan for a time because I thought LaDainian Tomlinson was the greatest player I'd ever laid eyes on. He was so good. But you know, like I don't really hitch myself to any wagon because I feel like you're setting yourself up for disappointment like 95% of the time.
Yeah.
If you cheer for one team. I mean, unlike you, who's a Patriot fan who just gets to live the highs of life and you know, ride high all the time.
Yeah.
You know, imagine being like a Bills fan or like a Jaguars fan or a Lions fan would probably be the worst of all of them. I mean, it's just year after year of just gut wrenching disappointment. I don't know how people live like that.
I can tell I'm 43 because I have a place in my heart for Jets fans, right? Like they needed this quarterback, Zach Wilson, that they just drafted to be better than Mac Jones, the guy the Patriots drafted, and that does not appear to be the case. But as I tell my kids,
Mike White is better than Mac Jones, though. Mike White, is the greatest star in the NFL. Right?
Good. You're right.
Guy's just hucking the ball. It reminds me of what's the name of the backup quarterback on the Bears and what he did? Not the Bears, the Browns. Case Keenum at Houston, where he was throwing like 400 yards a game and like passing 65 times.
Yeah.
Like that Mike White's bringing that to the NFL. It's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah. I just tell my kids, honey, it's just the Patriots have the best head coach, you know. That's what I just tell them about Bill Belichick. I've been ending interviews, like lower profile interviews during UFC 268 fight week. Probably shouldn't admit this on the air. But I'll wrap up an interview in, you know, Wisconsin, right? And they'll be like, all right, thanks for joining us, John. Have a great call this weekend. We'll talk to you soon. I'll be like, thank you guys, man. I appreciate you having me on. Bill Belichick's the best. We'll talk to you soon. And they're like, because everybody hates him, you know? Everybody hates him. It's like, okay, you know? I would never have done that when I'm 33. Now I'm 43 and I don't care as much. All right. Rapid fire questions with my man, Aaron Bronsteter, on the way out. All right. So the last time I stood on a block to do an interview was when I interviewed Brock Lesnar at the Ultimate Fighter Training Center 10 years ago, 2011, when I had just started with the UFC. No, this might have been for MMA Live in like 2008 or 2009. So I go up to do the post-fight show this weekend and I see them going for the fucking block. You know, because I'm on set with Anthony Smith, Chael Sonnen, and Michael Eaves, and they're all 6 foot or more. Like, I'm not 5'6", Rosendo Sanchez. I'm 5'9". So I have no problems with my height. Like, I'm very comfortable with my height until I see them going for the block. I didn't accept the block. I looked kind of foolish on TV. I acknowledged it on camera because I felt like I had to. Have you ever stood on a block to interview a subject?
I haven't, but I've had Stipe Miocic crouch down for an interview. I don't know if that counts.
Oh, right.
It was after he beat Francis. And I remember this vividly because it was one of the hardest interviews I've ever had to do because while I was interviewing Stipe, blood started trickling out of his ear, like down the side of his face. And I had to not focus on that while I was talking to him. Yeah. But it was just like he was smiling. He was having a good time. Yeah. He had just overcome the odds. Everybody thought Francis was going to win. Yeah. And he was crouching down right next to me. So his ear was like at eye level with me. And just blood started streaming down the side of his ears. That's why I remember that so vividly. But I have never stood on a block for an interview.
Good. Yeah. Try to avoid that fate. Stipe,
how tall are you? I think
5'9",
height, right?
5'9"
also.
5'9". Mm-hmm. That's why I wear high tops though, like around UFC headquarters. You know, get a little inch where I can. All right. What is the city of birth on your birth certificate?
Toronto.
All right. So so that's good, right? Because like sometimes people say, oh, where are you from? Right. You say, oh, I'm from Boston. Right. And they say, oh, well, where are you from? I was like, well, I'm from the Metro West area, but my birth certificate says Boston, Massachusetts, because I was born in the 1970s. And when you lived in Natick, probably in 1978, and you were having a baby, you had to go into the fucking city, the Boston Lying In Hospital. So I was born in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm from fucking Boston. Kenflo, city of birth for you.
Let's see. I was living in Westwood, but I think the hospital I was born might have been Boston.
All right, let's get that answer for the listenership next week. All right, AB, worst sport to watch on television.
Oh, people are probably going to hate this answer, but it's got to be baseball. Like baseball's so boring.
Yeah,
and I mean, I don't know how people watch 162 games of baseball a year. Like one game of baseball is painful enough for me. 162 games people watch of baseball every year. I don't know. Like the thing about MMA is it's such an ADD sport. There's so much going on, and basketball too. Like I watched basketball, and basketball's like, oh, you go down the court, pass, score. Go down the court, pass, score. Baseball's like, man, we've got 14,000 in attendance today.
Yeah, man.
This pitching This picture is brought to you by Nathan's Hot Dogs, and it's 78 degrees outside today. That's the hardest job ever. Calling baseball
filling all
on
that
radio must be the most difficult because there's like a pitch every like 2 minutes.
Vince Scully,
here's the windup.
Broadcaster of all time. I don't know how he filled all those gaps without an analyst. Absolutely incredible. Yeah, I challenge people on the baseball front. Forget an inning, forget a game. Put your phone down, watch an at-bat. See if you can get through an at-bat without looking at your cellular telephone. All right, if you could pick one sports team, I know you don't seem to have a dog in the NFL fight. You don't like hockey, which you shouldn't admit too loudly on the streets of Toronto. If you could pick one sports team to win a title next, who would it be?
Well, the Raptors just won one, but I'd probably take the Raptors again. That's the only team I've really ever had any real investment in is the Raptors because the franchise came about when I was like in my formative years, right? That's when it came to Toronto in 1995. So, that's really the only team I've ever had any sort of real emotional investment in, and they've won the championship recently, so I'm happy about that. But I wouldn't mind seeing them get another chip.
You're good. No, I like that. All right, and last question. You don't have to tell me which one. Do you have a favorite child of the three?
No, I don't. I think about it all the time. Do you ever have that weird Sophie's Choice thing where like if somebody said like you have to like kill one of your kids, who's like I'm going to kill one of your kids and you have to choose which one? Do you ever have that like crazy thought?
Not that one. I mean, I certainly think
I have that
about
thought all the time. I had it today.
But...
I had it earlier today, I remember.
Man.
And thinking like, I don't know what I would do. I'd have to like tell them to kill me and then just kill one of them after because I wouldn't be able to live with myself.
Yeah, I don't
chosen
know.
one of them.
Yeah.
I'd have to be like, take me and then whatever you want to do from there is up to you.
I'll have to get back to you on that one, but I do have a favorite kid, depending on the day and when you ask me.
Yeah, but that's not that's not a fair answer. Depending on the day, of course. Yeah, the kid that's not giving me a hard time that day is my favorite kid for sure. Right. But I don't have an overall favorite. I don't have power rankings.
I do. See, that's the thing. And it's like, I think, but you're not, you are honest, right? You answered so quickly that even if you were hooked up to a lie detector, where some people would say they don't have a favorite kid, if you have a least favorite kid or a kid that annoys you more than the other kids, then that means that one of them is probably a peg up. But it's great to have you on, my man. I mean, let's maybe try to work you back in here in the not too distant future. If you want more from Aaron Bronsteter, and candidly, if you are a mixed martial arts fan and you're not following this guy, the People's Reporter, I don't know what you're doing. It's at Aaron Bronsteter, TSN Sports. Appreciate your time, brother, and I will see you on the road soon. Good to have you back there on the streets.
Hey, my pleasure. And if you want to do the Bronsteter minute, I'll just jump on after Ray Longo every week. It sounds good to me.
Yeah, he took 4 of your minutes today, so we'll have to talk to him. Thank you, buddy.
Well, he owes me. I'll let him know next time I see him.
That's good.
See you guys. Thank you.
Aaron Bronsteter.